Very excited that you're here. Julie and I have done this a couple times. For me, the last time we were invited to the London Scrum Gathering, and we did it there to a packed room and really got some really great feedback. And so we've incorporated some of that feedback and wanted to try it again with all of you here at DCSUG. So we're really excited to have this opportunity to obviously be here with all of you. As Brian said, my name is Mark. I am a managing consultant and agile coach here at Excella for almost 3 years. And a little bit of a background for me is I came up through the ranks of being a business analyst, requirements analyst, then into IT project management, very much in a waterfall-based approach. I worked for what is now defunct SRA for quite some time. And there was something about working in waterfall. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't for me. And one day I woke up and was told that we were an agile company. And yes, exactly. It's kind of funny. But slowly began to understand what that meant back in my agile or back in my SRA days, and became a Scrum Master. And then from there, for several years, I was a Scrum Master, and then moved more into agile coaching. So I've been in the agile space for about 10 years now. And this workshop is great because it is a small facet of a very important part of coaching, I feel, and that is obviously observation. So we're going to talk a lot about that in moments to come.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you guys for making it out on a Monday. I know Mondays are long days to begin with, so we really appreciate you guys being here to participate with us. So as Mark said, Julie Wyman, I work for Excella as an agile coach. I really enjoy interacting with teams and trying to grow ourselves and look for some of the small things that are attainable and that we can apply at any project that we're on to make ourselves better. So I think that's a lot of what this workshop tonight is about, and I look forward to interacting with you guys.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Let's move on.
That is not working.
That is not working.
So we're going to go with it, and I'll just move them along for now.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So, yeah, so this workshop, like Mark said, is really all about practicing observational skills, something that a lot of us probably do in any role that we're in on any given day, but that we may not spend that much time actually thinking about or bringing a lot of intention to how we're observing or what we're observing or how we frame and share our observations. So that's really about what today is focused on, is how can we be a little bit more intentional, how can we try to be a little bit more focused to try to find nuggets of what's happening in our teams and our organizations that we can really use to help ourselves provide better focused coaching and support to our organizations, and to have a little bit of fun. So it's going to definitely be reliant on you guys to dive in and participate and share with us what you're feeling and what you're experiencing so that we can work it through together.
Okay, with that said, this is a very, very interactive workshop today, so everybody will be involved, and we will shuffle people around in just a moment to make sure all the tables are filled with individuals. But to provide a little bit of context, this is where we want to kind of start you off, okay? And you can obviously read, and I'll read with you, but I want you to imagine that you've been recently hired as a coach, a consultant, perhaps a Scrum Master, and you decide that the best way to start your engagement working with this new team is to simply observe the team working, okay? That's the context that we're going to start with today, okay? So you can imagine yourself doing that. So real quickly, what types of things do you think you might want to notice or just notice right offhand, given this context? Yeah.
Flow of communication.
The flow of communication? Okay. It can be a little more specific.
So four people, if one person's doing all the talking, or if there's a balance between the communications and the type of communications going on.
Okay, so flow of communication and the balance, if it's four talking and maybe not one person or vice versa. Okay? Okay, who else? Yes?
Do people feel psychologically safe in the space?
Do people feel psychologically safe in this space? Okay, good. How might you notice that happening or not?
If they don't talk, if they're holding back, they might not be safe.
Okay, so if they're not talking, there might be something happening there. Okay, sounds good. Who else? Anyone else? Yes.
What are people's roles in the room?
Okay. You might want to know, especially if you do know coming in what the roles are, you might be able to use that. Okay. Yeah.
Compliance to norms.
Compliance to norms. Okay. Okay. And do you want to give an example as what that might mean?
Say every day you store your code in a code repository. But this guy over here doesn't feel he wants to because it takes too much time.
Okay.
Or we need to make sure that the code is tested before it's released, but the product owner wants to get it out in the field as soon as possible.
Okay.
So those are
Okay. So if you understand what the norms are, you might get a sense of that, and then you might witness or observe things that might be askew from what those norms might be. Okay. Julie, anything on your end? No. One more, Matthias.
What seems to be the general level of happiness, and is that like sort of the base level, and then are there specific times or occasions when the stress levels go up, and that will probably tell you something about where the pain points for the team are?
Okay. So is there a general sense of happiness, and do you notice stress levels going up, and why those stress levels, or under what circumstances might that be happening? Great. Okay. Great ideas, great things to think about, great things to look for. Thank you. So one thing to keep in mind, like an iceberg, we realize, I don't know what the percent is, but we've often been told that most of the iceberg is, of course, underneath the surface of the water, right? So what we may be observing is very surface level. Could we also be realizing, or at least be observing, things that might be more of an undercurrent? Okay. And some of that, I think through the techniques that we're going to be practicing today, we might be able to perhaps unsurface some of that stuff today through different ways to observe and techniques.
Yeah, so like I said, we do observation all the time, especially if you're in a Scrum Master role or a coach role. But what we're going to show today is not an exhaustive list, but just a handful of examples of some different aspects or types of interactions that you could observe, because we want to see if by being a little bit more intentional, thoughtful about kind of focusing in on some areas, can we get richer information than just kind of sitting back and letting everything hit us at once and then trying to sort through it. So we're just going to go through a couple of examples, start with some things that we think are a little bit more common or that we may kind of think through and we typically think about observation, and then get into some things that we may not always think about as much. So to start us off, body language, something that a lot of us probably have some thought about. We probably have heard this before. You know, we may have some misconceptions about what some different body language means. It may not always be accurate to what we think, but it's probably something that we're used to at least picking up on, taking in. You know, is someone crossing their arms? Are they nodding their head a lot? Are they looking away? Are they leaning in? You know, all these things, again, not necessarily knowing what they mean, but we're kind of used to picking up on those physical cues and seeing how people themselves are acting. I'm gesturing right now, right? But like, what are we doing as you're either speaking yourself or in an interaction with someone else or even in a group? So body language is one that we think we, probably do pick up on, but there are some others as well.
So tone of voice is obviously one that you can think about. If I'm talking very softly, that could mean something. It could mean something. We don't know what it necessarily means. If you're hearing somebody talk very loudly, it could be something else to pick up on. Perhaps you have fast talkers. Perhaps you have very slow talkers as well. Again, tone of voice could be something to actually think. When does it get softer? So maybe you want to pair it against a particular moment happening. Okay, what was that trigger necessarily? Perhaps somebody walked into the room. The tone of the conversation may have changed. Things to think about. So another area of observation could be the pronouns that people are using. Now, this is not one that I really paid attention to before having a conversation with another coach, when he kind of mentioned, well, have you noticed, are people using each other's names when they talk to each other? Am I saying, well, he said this, or am I saying, well, Mark offered this idea, right?
again, it may or may not mean something, but are we noticing how people are talking? Is there a lot of we, or is there a lot of I and you? You know, again, it's just a data point, but it's something that we may not, without kind of thinking a little bit more, be used to picking up and seeing again, when is that happening? Was there a shift? You know, did something else happen that led us down a different path? So the use of pronouns could be another interesting piece of information.
So physical space is also something to think about. And tonight's going to be really interesting because we got a lot of people and we got some good physical space. But, you know, how are people positioned around a table? How far apart may they be? If you happen to know leaders or managers that are also in the room, how do people react to the fact that they're in the room? Does the manager more of a sit back and kind of overlook things, or are they right in there? How do others react to the fact that somebody might be in the room as well? Is there space in the room that's not being used? And perhaps there's space that is being used a lot. Maybe there's something going on there that you might want to understand and uncover at some point.
Yeah, are people oriented in a way that allows them to kind of see each other, or are they looking at something else? Just everything about how the group has chosen to use their space could be an indicator, some useful data point for us. So another one to observe is collaboration. Now, collaboration can be really broad, but we'd be looking for some more specific indicators of what does that mean? How is this group working together? Does there seem to be some kind of director who's guiding everyone, who's kind of leading and ushering? Do there tend to be, you know, someone off in the corner doing solo work? One big group, lots of small groups? How is the team or the organization working together? Is there a lot of discussion? Does it seem like people are frequently offering ideas, and how are they being received in the group? Or is it just kind of one idea and that's what people use for the rest of the session? Does it seem like people are offering disagreements and challenges, or there's just an initial consensus? So all these things are different aspects about how a group is actually working together that are specific things that we could be picking up on and giving us clues to where we may want to have some follow-up coaching conversations.
And decision making. So things to think about, things to might want to notice. How are decisions being made in the room right there in real time? Is it in a collaborative nature? Is it one person making the decisions for everybody else, and maybe everyone else is kind of agreeing along with what's happening in the room? Are decisions being directed upon, or is it more of a consensus-based? Thinking out loud is another interesting one too. The one team that I happen to be working with right now, they all think out loud, and it's to the point where you've got to really tell them to be quiet at times because they talk over each other. But that's just this particular team is how they operate. So is by thinking out loud, or the opposite, obviously, thinking all to themselves, and then you don't know what's going on. So that's also something to think about.
So one other thing that you could observe about how team works is how do they choose to share information? So again, like Mark said, are they talking it out, hashing it out? Is there a lot of conversation? Is it a team that seems to go up to the whiteboard and they're documenting a lot of stuff? Is it things that are written up, paragraphs that they're reading? When decisions are made, how do they choose to document them and disperse them and share them with a group? Just a level of information and detail around how is this group or these people choosing to work together. So that was not at all an exhaustive list, but I think it helped to kind of show us when we say, oh, let's just observe that team, how many different things you could choose to hone in on, how many things you could focus in and try to get a little bit more detail around to try to just have that be some data, some information that you use to inquire further and really figure out what's going on. Those are just some examples. But let's say we've done that. Let's say I've really spent time kind of just embedded with the team, just taking in all these things. I have some notes. Now I'm ready to share them because I want to make an impact and I want to work with these individuals or this team. All right. So there's a lot we could say, but we've boiled it down to basically our 2 key points. The first is that you want to make sure when you're sharing your observations to state them factually in very neutral language. And really importantly, you want to avoid interpretation. You want to avoid assigning some judgment, interpreting them, saying that you know what they mean. I think you may have noticed when Mark and I were even describing these areas of observation, we kept saying, you could observe this, that, or the other. You may not know exactly what it means, but it's an interesting piece of data that you might want to follow up on. And that's because the actual observation itself is just your entry point. It's your entry point into having that deeper discussion. So for example, if I've been watching Mark's team, he asked me to come in and give him some feedback, and then afterwards I say, hey Mark, man, why were you so angry in that meeting? You were just sitting back, arms crossed, you didn't offer up a word. What had you so annoyed? How did I do at sharing my observation?
I'm having a great day today.
Yeah, Mark's saying, what are you talking about? I am feeling great. What did I do? Yeah, I interpreted it. Now, there were some facts that I mixed in there. It is a factual observation that he sat with his arms crossed leaning back. It's a factual observation that he did not speak up in the meeting. But I went ahead and I decided, I know why you did that. It's because you were annoyed. It's because you were angry. I've gone ahead and made these assumptions. So now if I lead with that in sharing my observation with Mark, he's already pushing me away. He's like, you don't get me. What are you talking about? I had a great day. Where is this coming from? So a better place to start would have just been to say, hey, Mark, I noticed that you didn't speak up in that meeting. Was there anything that was holding you back today?
Not really. No, I just decided to listen to everyone's responses today.
So I could ask some more probing questions from there, but we can have more of a conversation because it starts off a much more neutral footing, and I'm not telling him that I know what happened and I know why. I'm just sharing what I observed and giving space for us to then inquire and ask more questions and to try to figure out, is this something that's maybe worth going down the path? Or maybe Mark just had an off day. There's literally nothing wrong. This is not worth me getting involved in. We're fine. Move on to something else. So after we take the time to really make our observations, this is one of the hardest parts. It's one of the hardest parts for me, and I keep talking about this when we do these workshops because our brains are wired to make sense of things. They're wired to see something, find a pattern, and say, oh, okay, I've seen this before, I know what this means, and then to want to help. But this is where we can really do our teams and individuals that we're working with a big service if we pause. If we put a little pause between that observation and the sharing of it. I have found that it's really been useful for me to write down my observations and then read them with the lens of this before I would go and share them, because even sometimes the way I've written them down has given away that I let some interpretation or some assigning of meaning slip in. So sounds basic, but this is one of the biggest things that we want to try to encourage you to practice in the workshop portion today.
Yeah, and this is why when we when we designed this, we wanted to provide that context of being a consultant. Any context will work, obviously, but in our roles, and I'm sure a lot of your roles out there too, we need to be very sensitive about the relationship that we're establishing with the people that we're working with, especially as consultants and Scrum Masters and Agile coaches and what have you, but any context. But being very aware of that interpretation, we do want to preserve a relationship that's been established, or if we're building trust with the team that we're working with, not doing exactly what Julie was doing in that example is obviously something we don't want to do. So that's why we had that context in the beginning. So when we go through our exercises today, it might help just a little bit to imagine yourself as, hey, I've been brought in to actually help this team as a consultant. Okay, if that's the case, I want to put my best foot forward here. I want to keep these two basic bullet points in mind as I go through and think about these observations.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true, but even any team, if you're an internal team member, if you're a coach for a company full-time, aside from that external relationship, even so, any observations you share will be undercut if someone feels like you didn't understand why I was doing that. You already are pretending to have me figured out. So I think anyone can benefit from just that pause. Again, like the actual factual observation is important because it can lead to a good conversation, but it will be a more meaningful one, whether it's with a client, whether it's just with a colleague that you work with all the time, if you start from a very inquisitive mindset of just stating what you saw and letting the conversation unfold from there. So,
Matthias.
oh,
Yeah, I feel like the arms crossing thing, that just needs to finally die.
I know this is very comfortable for me,
Yeah,
actually.
same. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
this all the time.
Yeah.
So that's one of the worst ones in my opinion. But also, that triggered me thinking about, it seems like, you mentioned like this whole coming in and observing for a while. I think one of the things that's important from that perspective is that you kind of compare people against their own baseline. So that like if somebody, never crosses their arms and always, is like wide open, and then all of a sudden they hear something and they go like this, that's different from someone who does this all the time.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're constantly mad. So to me, I think the change in behavior, some people are kind of always quiet, and that may in and of itself be something that you
Yeah.
want to talk to them about and see, can I, pull this person out a little bit. But, the situation you just described, somebody who talks a lot, and then in that meeting, they don't say anything.
Right.
So that popped up in my head as we were talking about that, and that seems to maybe be a kind of important thing too.
Yeah, I think
That's a good
Matthias's
point.
point is really good, as having enough basis for your observations, right? You don't want to just observe 10 minutes and then, launch into providing feedback. You kind of want to have some history and to see over time. And that's kind of what Mark was getting at in some of the examples he gave. He said, what other things are happening at the same time that triggered changes, right? So if the room was really loud and everyone was talking and everyone is involved, and then one person entered the room and sat at the front of the table and everyone stopped talking, that's a change, right? And so what are different events happening at the same time, and what other changes are they triggering? So yeah, that's really good. Any other questions?
Julie and Mark, real quick, we didn't have the extra mic to run for the audience to pick up on the question, so either restate or
Oh.
the observation or the restated question, which I
Yeah.
captured. Good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other things that stood out to you before we turn it on you guys? All right, well, we'll put you guys to work, and then we'll see what stands out. So really, I think I mentioned at the beginning, this is pretty simple. We just wanted to give you enough to kind of get it in your mind, thinking about these things, these different areas that you could observe, how you're going to share your observations. And really, the whole rest of the workshop is intended for you guys to put it to practice. So to give everyone in this room an opportunity to be an observer, and also to feel what it's like to be observed. And so we're going to run through 2 rounds, and then we're also going to have small group debrief, and then we'll close with a larger group debrief that will kind of tie it all together, and will also allow us to talk through just the mechanics of this workshop if you ever wanted to use this with your teams. All right. So, one thing I did want to call out and mention, this workshop activity piece is definitely inspired by an activity that Esther Derby and Don Gray run in their Coaching Beyond the Team training that they offer. This is where I first experienced it, and then it triggered some conversations with other coaches that I work with. And so really we've taken some inspiration, tweaked it a little for our purposes, but we definitely want to give them credit for inspiring it. So I'm going to give you guys the lay of the land, make sure that everybody understands where we're going to be going, and then it's really going to be turning it over to you all. So I mentioned 2 rounds. 2 rounds because we want everybody to feel what it's like to be an observer and also to be observed. So we're going to be practicing in small groups. For this workshop, your small group is your table. So that's kind of why we purposely had the groups a little bit larger than we would have, because we want to make sure that the groups are sufficiently large to have some interactions to allow you to observe. So if this is one of our small groups, when we kick off round 1, half of you guys are going to decide, I'm going to be a builder, I'm a doer, and the other half are going to be an observer, just for round 1. And we're going to give you guys a challenge, and that's what the builders will be doing. The observers will be practicing making observations, and then we'll have time to debrief and share them. And then round 2, we'll switch, and everyone who was a builder will become an observer. Sound good so far? Question?
I observed something. There's 6 women and 3 men here, and there's so what do we put that in?
That is a workshop, a meetup observation. I don't know what it means, but it is a fact. That is true. But I think all of our groups are well enough sized. We want, if you are someone right now who is sitting aside, we'll want you to
Yeah.
come join a table just so that you can
There's a
be a
chair
full
here,
participant.
here,
So
two
yeah, we
here,
have
one here.
openings here. The tables don't all need to be equally sized. I think the groups we have will work, but definitely maybe a couple people can join
Yeah,
this
there's
table, and that'll be great.
Two here, yeah.
I think these guys are
One
going to.
there. There's two right here in this table. And this one's open here. George, this is open too.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Sure.
I think we're good.
Did you get one, George? We're balanced out? Okay. Great. All right, so actually just give us a second and then you guys are jumping right ahead, which I appreciate. But we'll just give you a little bit more information and then let you decide how you want to organize. So these are our round one specific instructions. So yes, our very first step is that at your table, we want it to be about 50-50. So go ahead, don't take more than 30 seconds. Just decide for round one, who wants to be the active builder and who wants to start by being an observer.
Question.
Yes.
Yes.
Are we going to be doing the same exercise?
No. No.
Okay.
No. No, that would
Yeah,
not be
we thought about
fair
that.
in the sense of competition. That would be an advantage. So no, we will be switching the activity. Yep. So go ahead right now. Again, we want about 50-50, but just quickly decide who's going to start out as a builder and who's going to start out as an observer.
We will ring the bells at 30 seconds.
I think we're good. Yeah. Mark's been waiting all day to do that. So you guys gave him some fun there. Awesome. Are all of our tables set? Let's see a thumbs up. Woo, okay. Excited. So all of those of you who decided to be observers for round one, thank you. What we would like to ask you guys to do is to each go ahead and take one of the worksheets. So we have in the middle of the table a bag that has all the supplies you'll need. So you'll find some worksheets folded in half, and what the worksheets have on them is those observation areas that we went through before. Physical space, collaboration, decision making, pronouns. What we'd like to recommend is that for those of you who are observers, pick just one of these areas. Now I know this may feel a little bit awkward. We're used to kind of trying to observe everything at once, but just for the sake of this exercise, pick one of them. Just one. Talk amongst yourselves. It'll work best if you guys each pick different areas. So if I'm an observer, I might say, hey, okay, I'll focus on decision making. I'll focus on use of physical space. So talk amongst the observers and each try to pick one area. And for the whole 5 minutes of the exercise, you're really just going to be focused in on this one observation area. Sound good? All right, so we're going to give you guys about a minute to just quickly make your selections. Go ahead and hand out the worksheets so everyone can see them. Yeah, you don't have to cover all of them, but you can each just pick one. Each observer pick one area.
Continue on. But for now, the observers, each one of you picks one area.
be hard if we're both talking at the same time?
Well, I've just switched it to where I was going to try to listen in on that table somewhat, but it's going to be hard. Like it's going to be
okay.
But yeah, if you want to mute, just mute for now.
Okay,
What were we
well,
gonna
we're
say?
not done yet, so.
Okay, you're not. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Everybody needs, but have enough.
Okay, so it sounds like everyone has worked together with the observers and decided which area they're going to observe. You'll know that each of the bags has Sharpies and Post-its. So what we'd like to recommend is for each observer, just go ahead and take a stack of the Post-its and your own Sharpie. And as you're going through the exercise and they're building, you're just writing your observations on the Post-its. So whatever comes to you for your area of observation, kind of just write one observation per Post-it. You can just keep them in front of you. You don't have to put them anywhere. But just make sure that each observer has one Sharpie and a pack of Post-its. Builders, are you ready?
Yeah.
I don't hear you guys. Ready? Yeah, okay. That's it. All right, so I want to make sure that you guys are fully prepared. You're going to have 5 minutes to execute on your challenge. You know you can do it. 5 minutes to figure out. This isn't 5 minutes of planning, then 5 minutes of doing 5. This is just 5 minutes. So however you want to organize is up to you. You have this full room of the ATX to use. So up to you if you want to rearrange your space. You have that opportunity. So your challenge is going to be to build a 5-foot tall structure out of the index cards that we provided. If you run out of index cards, we have more. If you're wondering how tall 5 feet is, it's about my height. So a 5-foot tall structure out of index cards in 5 minutes.
Any questions?
Any questions before we turn on the timer?
Yes.
What are we, is there anything we're not allowed to use?
You can stay in the room.
Stay in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, only index cards.
Just the index
Only
cards to
material is
build.
The index cards.
Yeah.
No tape.
Any other questions before we go forward? Move forward. Yes. Has to be freestanding. All right.
All right, looks like you guys are off, so we're going to let you go. 5 minutes.
Go. Go. Observers, observe only. Observers, if you need to move to get closer, try to
Hey, Mark.
Well, I suggest
Play around and figure out like what our procedures and figure out what
Mute if you want.
you guys can stay where you are. Feel free to move if it's
Mark, we wanted to know online if they could get a copy of that.
Stand up and move around and follow.
observers, feel free to move around if you want. You don't have to sit still. Let's stop holding and then let's start holding. On the floor. Okay. Let's move around if you want. Maybe it's maybe not. Observers, feel free to move around. You probably would want to, go over there and see what they're doing and listen to them. Right, Michael? I do. Did you have any ideas about that? I can see
Well, no, we're like, trying to figure out our approach. Once we have a I know just like we're gonna have something about that. Aside from Ooh, I like that.
Okay, so you need a whole bunch of code for a whole bunch of Right. I don't think we can go 5 foot tall feet here because I'm not even here.
We can also add additional pieces if we need to.
So which side? Are we doing on the board or on the
We got about 2 minutes.
Looks like likewise. So how about we just start folding these into lengthwise strips?
Oh, so we're not just doing like kind of like that. Yeah, because if we go straight up with that.
Is it 5 feet?
Like the.
Yeah, we've got a minute and 4 seconds.
Oh, I see. Because you seem to have a really good idea. And then you'll be able to answer it.
That way. So it's probably 12 layers, give or take. Card. Do you want to, so, yeah. Is it like we want to experiment, or should we try to give it a great insight?
Try to. Not building just straight up.
We did also want to have somebody else take a look at the team over there is doing all the work. Because you don't get into our area. There's a little time.
You have to do it be taller than the second still team.
Okay.
Like nobody was.
So we're going to recommend that you can either kind of do a circle around your structure if you want, or come back to your tables. We'll just give you a moment to get situated, but you want your whole group together. So, you want to come over here?
I'll bring my giant power notes.
All right, so let's reform our group. All right, so we could just get a moment of your time. Very good. All right, I saw a lot of interesting attempts. I don't think I quite saw any. I didn't hear any calls for measurement, but I saw a lot of good discussions and techniques. Mark and I, as we do this, are coming to photograph the many different designs that we've seen. We should put them all up together at some point. But we saw some pretty cool ones getting started today. So the goal was to have a little fun, but we didn't necessarily really expect you guys to be able to achieve the full 5-foot tower today. The goal was really to give our observers an interesting little situation in a short time period of different dynamics to observe. So however you guys came up with a plan, however you chose to self-organize and distribute the work, however you chose to execute on it, whether you made any changes, all of that was just there to have an opportunity for the observers to pick up on. So now what we'd like to ask you guys to do is you're going to stay in your same small groups, and we're going to do some debrief. So we'd like you guys to start by having each observer kind of go one by one, say and share with your group the area that you observed. So I observed information sharing, I observed decision making, and then actually read to them the actual notes that you wrote down on your Post-its, and go through and share all of them. And then after that, go ahead and have the builders share whether they even noticed that they were being observed, if it impacted them in any way. And then go ahead and feel free to kind of use some of these topics as prompts. You can take it wherever your group would like to go, but we'd like to recommend that you consider how did it feel observing just that one area really in a focused way. Was it hard? Look at what you actually wrote down. See if it's all facts. Did anything slip away? Was it hard to try to focus on just those neutral observations? Did you notice any jumps to interpretation? So we're going to start with about 8 minutes, and we really want you guys to just have that conversation with your small group. And Mark and I will rotate around. If you do have any questions, just flag us down. Any questions before we get started? I still see some people building. They're trying.
Get the time modification.
Yeah. All right. So go ahead and jump into debrief.
Minimal eye contact, at least in the beginning, and then we were seated with sufficient spacing between everyone was far apart until we started.
You just kind of organically like switched.
I did tone of voice so I'm gonna do the same thing, read verbatim my cards. So I noticed that Jess, you had a really soft tone throughout the whole thing. So I just wanted to
Anxiety and stress.
So that's what Andy.
sorry if I didn't butcher your name, but more than okay, great. Of course. I wrote that you and the team had significant commonalities, so you didn't really know each other's names. So I heard a lot of hours I also have that the tone evolved into more of a frustrated one, like when you guys come up with a decision for how you want to execute this.
So I had
kind of what I picked up on.
two observations. The first one is that you guys are total formation.
I have more.
The second one is
I wrote that Mark had an optimistic tone when your idea, when you leveraged her idea, I guess it kind of the tone became more optimistic. And then your Mark's voice got louder after the idea took shape and really started coming together. Optimism.
Did you ever figure that you were
Optimism equals louder
I mean, a
voice.
couple things, almost inevitable.
And then pronouns
All had
equals
to be
So if there's only two teams that left today, you're one of them.
I had the physical space,
Someone who looks like his eye is different. Yeah, I'm trying to stay away from this, from making a judgment. Let's say information and look at me from that perspective.
had more notes than the other
So, one of the things that I struggled with was when you're
now you're used to the space in front of you. When you were building and Mark, Teresa, and Doc actually where you were saying like this Teresa
well, no, I had like basically little dots for where you were at the table, and was going to do marks to just quickly
yeah, things don't really work
So I was
on space in the beginning.
so that's sort of
Then sort of the start of the main
Right, I was.
so basically,
after a while, I noticed more moving closer to the main tower. So after if I closer to the tower and then.
For me, I used to be on
some collaboration. It was very clear that when she was the lead and started talking right from the beginning and kind of tried to facilitate the conversation. That went on for a little bit, and then Mark was completely silent until he came up with a suggestion, and he jumped in, and it became more of a three-way conversation. Were offered and accepted, so when somebody said, I just got up and work,
you're right, I asked the question, I didn't say let's do it on the floor, because it would be more stable. I said, do you think,
the solution,
I posted as a question, yeah, that's a good point. So I know, and you guys were building up here, so I was confused. And then you moved on.
Very self-organized, and everybody had with regards to decision-making, we're all thinking out loud. We were actively thinking out loud about the solution. There was a situation where the solution emerged from somebody picking up on somebody else's idea, and then like, if we add to that. First promising option that had relatively strong vocal support ended up and then there was a phase where there was a lot of individual experimentation very quickly exploring a range of different options. I don't want you what anybody else is doing or working, and that's how
Information sharing. So what I'm doing the best idea with getting everyone's trial and error. Not really or actually together. I felt like
The other issue with me observing is I wasn't clear what I was observing.
But what I also saw was, and I don't think it's actually and then it just but I don't even know if anyone actually that. You guys were so great.
Go by the energy, but I'm going to talk to you.
So I don't know if you're saying that. Oh, okay.
So it's interesting, it's really easy to get lost in the exercise and forget about this part. Yes. And just focus on just observing. Funny, and I was very
He's trying to learn the working software.
we have about a minute left. Consider some exercises, tough to not interpret. Observers like get you repetitive and just like builders will stand down or it's 5 minutes. What was with that?
You no longer observing it during the activity.
That was not a requirement. Not a requirement.
Right, but then we kind of like jumped in on you guys. But I don't know, that's kind of how I felt. But then also like listening to feedback. Yeah, how did it feel for rather than try and on one area, or provide interpretation or explanation, just kind of listen and take that in. That was
Incredible, I have to observe.
I thought it was very important to like offer up suggestions. For me, I was like, oh, I have an idea. I feel like, I don't know, I want to feel tentative to write things down. You watch, are efficient, and are
Yeah, no, it's actually hard to sort of like.
We're going to give you guys about another minute to just make sure that everyone has a chance to finish sharing their observations.
You guys were fine. And then someone's per hour, and I guess I need to write this in your attention structure.
I heard
We thought that was part of it.
I noticed that even though I tried to separate the observation from the interpretation, but I couldn't help adding the interpretation. Like I try to keep the two apart, like first here's what I saw, but then in several cases I noticed like, and this is what it meant to me. So I don't think I've mashed them together too much, but it's really hard to leave the second part off, like either in your brain or actually talking about it.
When I decided to go
Were you looking for other ideas, or were you seeing if anyone else?
No, I was looking at, I was actually concentrating decision making. And but when I came back and you said, well, what did they do? I knew the time was short and I couldn't get the words out.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
5 feet from the bottom, from the floor, does that count?
Really make sure my
All right, so we're gonna regroup. It sounds like everyone, thank you, mostly had a chance to get through their observations. Did everyone have a chance to share? Yeah, you guys did. Okay. So we just want to take a couple minutes before we dive into round 2, because we told you everyone would get their opportunity to practice. But from your round 1 discussion from your team, what were some of the things that stood out to you? What surprised you about just this first quick 5-minute exercise?
Just kind of how quickly we self-organized, frankly. We weren't worried about, oh, I don't want to say that, I'll hurt somebody. All hands on deck, everybody work, and everyone just kind of assumed the role and thing without thinking about it. We were just
Did it bother you at all? Did you notice? Did it weigh on you in any way that you were being observed? Did that factor in at all? Some head shakes, no.
I noticed, but it didn't bother me.
You did notice, but it didn't bother you.
didn't notice at all.
Didn't notice at all.
Did not change anything.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a lot of didn't notice at all. We ask because it's something that we're interested. We're often very aware as coaches and Scrum Masters, people that are sometimes observing a team, of trying to not be intrusive, to make sure that we're, you know, as observers, invited, and in a way, in the space in a way that doesn't impact the teams. We have come to see that in this challenge, people are so focused on building their towers that it doesn't seem to weigh on them. But I'm curious, as the observers, were you guys thoughtful at all? Were you intentional at all about where you stood or how you kind of surrounded the team to try to, you know, have as little disruption as possible? Did any of that factor in?
A little bit for me.
Yeah,
I
I
saw
saw
on
the other side of the glass.
Yeah, one thing,
Yeah, so someone said they stood on the other side of the glass, maybe to the space, but also just to give a little separation.
the only thing I observed about the observer was he was on the other side of the glass and I couldn't figure out why he was different than the other. That bothered me.
It threw you off that he was doing something differently than what the other observers were doing. Okay.
Observing the observer. Yes.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
So that's not really the main piece of the exercise. It's kind of the bonus piece, because obviously we're focusing today more on the actual observation and doing the observation, but it's just something interesting to think about when we're not in a fun meetup workshop setting of, you know, how you're sitting there scribbling your notes may be a little bit more noticed by the team.
Actually, I have to say, I think exactly the opposite. I stayed in the same place for the whole time. I didn't move or do anything different. Actually, they built in another place.
Yeah.
And I didn't go there.
So you
Because
stayed
it
where
was-
you were to
it
try
was
to
easy
just
and they
let
were
them
working
do their
there.
thing, and
That
instead
was
you stayed
their
where you were.
side, and here, I'm self-observing. I'm not going to be doing anything different at all.
Yeah. You tried to stay as much out of their way as possible. Cool. So let's hear from a couple observers. How was this exercise? They were busy, they were building, we know they were bringing it to these card towers, but what did you guys experience as observers? What was hard? What felt different? Yep.
So I had body language, and I think providing context to words that I know from my own experiences may not universally translate to the actual builders when they're experiencing that experience.
Can you give us an example?
So like, I put down anxiety, stress, and serious, right?
Yeah.
Like that's based on my experiences, but interpreting that for somebody else that I'm observing. Like I had Kristen, and I said, you know, she had the, you know, WTF look, and I was like, that, I don't know, is based on my experiences, but that might not be her experience.
So just repeating for the people on the live stream, you were saying that, you know, writing things down like anxiety and stressful and serious, and those are kind of shortcut words that for you, you know, you're taking notes, like that made sense to you, it totally told you what you thought was happening, but then when you went to share it, there was some curiosity, right? Like, well, what did I do that led you to that? What did that mean? What did you pick up on? And we saw how it was kind of hard. It's like, it seemed so easy to write down anxiety. But like, if you later have to actually explain it, well, what actually made you think of that? Like, we're not used to taking maybe notes at that level of detail, but there was something that really, your brain did it so quickly that you just wrote down anxiety. But what triggered it to make you kind of use that as your note? And yeah, as you said, it's then that in the discussion, it's a little bit harder if the word that made total sense to you with no bad intention, just like that's what I thought I saw, maybe doesn't quite resonate with the same person. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. What else? What else from any?
What about this side of the room? Anyone? Yes.
We were observed, we were not the observers, but I noticed, after the observer said that we didn't use any names, that at least I didn't take the time to look around and see the names of the people on my team, because we were so, I was so focused on doing it right and doing it fast. And also the fact we noticed at the end that we were all, Teresa noticed that we were all on this side, so it was a little different than having people across the table to work with. The space was a little off because we were.
Well, you guys kept the physical space that was given. You didn't choose to change it or move anywhere. You kept the status quo. But yeah, that's an interesting observation, right? That you just didn't use names, although we didn't know each other very well, but we did have the name tags and we didn't use them. Yeah, so that's an interesting observation.
I'm curious, what did that observation mean to you? Yeah.
That I didn't take time to know my team first. And,
Okay. Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. What else?
Any other observers? Matthias?
For me, given that we were told to just observe very neutrally, I tried to write down observations, and I think that went pretty well. And then when I gave the feedback, I gave the observation, and then in a couple of cases added the interpretation because it's just so like, well, which of course made sense in your situation. Now you weren't supposed to say that one. So.
That's exactly what I was telling these guys. It's so I've noticed and I've observed that people are actually pretty good at writing down the factual observations, but when it comes time to explain them, to like tell the story to others, we add it on. So it's part of what we're used to, what our habit is, right? Is to make sense of these things.
Yeah, and actually for me, part of it was when I read these things out just as facts, and like I got the impression that it would be kind in a way to interpret.
To embellish it a little,
You know what I'm saying? So in some ways it was to like soften the blow, even there weren't actually any blows.
Yeah.
Like the observations themselves just seem kind of harsh in a way. Right?
Yeah,
they could be open to interpretation in a bad way, and I wanted to avoid that. That's, I think, what it was, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And obviously here today we just asked you to kind of share the observations, so they were a little blunt or just factual. Obviously, if you were having a conversation with someone, you would be sharing them as an opening into a conversation and an opening to inquiry and understanding. So you would follow them up, not just list off 20 facts, right? But definitely I can see how we want to make sure that our messages are well received. So it's hard to not just jump in and make sure that we tab them with a little, well, it's okay, I would have done this too, we just add on to more than just the factual observations. So one more question before we switch and give everyone else an opportunity. How did it feel for the observers, for you guys to just focus on that one observation area?
It's hardest because it's normally you
Harder.
focus on multiple areas.
Yeah. Did it, so it felt a little hard, a little unnatural, but what it,
I had the opposite feeling. I thought it was going to liberate.
liberating, yeah. Why liberating?
Well, I was so accustomed to having to observe all of these things, simultaneously trying to register where I could just focus on one.
Yeah.
And then I can just really see.
Increase focus.
It's the focus.
Did you feel that you wrote more detailed observations on your area than you normally would have when you were trying to observe everything? Yeah, so this is obviously short, right? But I looked at some notes and they were pretty detailed about they moved here, they went here, like quick kind of play-by-play that it can be hard to capture when we're trying to take it all in. All right, well, builders, well done. Observers, good job. We're going to go ahead and switch roles. And Mark is going to walk you through what to expect for your round 2 challenge.
Okay. Well, if you thought that was tough. All right, so we are going to switch roles. So obviously that means builders are now observers, observers are now builders. Okay? The first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure the observers take a moment, the new observers take a moment to look through that handout, pick one observational detail that you would want, ideally not shared with somebody else. All right, so please take a moment to do that. Pick one item, and we'll get back to you in just a moment. You guys good? Yep. You guys good? Okay. You guys good? Everyone's got one? Okay. You guys good?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. This team good? You guys ready?
Oh, yeah.
So I'll do body language.
Okay, you guys good? I think we're waiting for this team. Anyone you want. Just pick one, but anyone you want. Yeah. Okay, you guys good? We gotta move on. All right. All right. Okay, so observers have now identified the one that they want. Like I said, ideally it's not shared with another person, but that's okay if it is. You will, like the other observers, be taking one observation per sticky note. All right, so go ahead and begin, when the time comes, go ahead and write them down. What is your activity? You're dying to know, right? I will say this, it has nothing to do with index cards. Sorry, but what your task is going to be, and maybe if you want to use the flip side of the handout, determine in 5 minutes the 3 most important characteristics of a high-performing team. So as a group of builders, you are building a list of the 3 most important characteristics of a high-performing team. Observers, you are silent as you observe.
5 minutes.
And you have 5 minutes beginning now.
Three characteristics of high-performing team.
What if we start just silent brainstorming or joint brainstorming? Silent brainstorming or joint? Cool.
Yeah, sure. I'll write it down. All right. Word vomit. Go.
Yeah. Should we write our own? This is gonna be a lot of work.
Yeah.
Write them down. Sorry, it's nothing, one person writing all of these things. You're just gonna-
I'll take it. I'll take it. It's okay.
So you want to do it silently? Or can you write on the, actually, if you write on the index cards, we can do some affinity mapping maybe.
Oh, like one on each part?
Yeah, you want to do that and then we
One
can
on each
kind
part,
of.
then we can get rid of the ones that we don't want, and then we'll have our list.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, that works. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
We can also, if we want to put them up against the wall. Okay.
We are halfway there, so we'll start
Yeah.
talking about.
Okay, I have frequent alignment.
Actually, oh, okay. Provided a skill fit, elaborate processes.
Yeah.
You guys want to, have you guys ever done dot voting?
Yeah.
Do you guys want to do a dot voting on this?
The main issue is having done
Yeah, collaboration and teamwork is good. I have accountability.
So do you want to do, start with
Two
minutes left?
Yeah.
So you want to do the dot voting to get sort of what someone hashed out? So this is 7, so what do we say we did 3 votes?
Yes.
So we're trying to get down to 3, right?
Yeah, we're trying to get down to 3.
Why don't we just do like sort of half.
Okay.
So I mean, like, because otherwise we're going to be continually like half.
Okay,
Sure.
which one of these?
Thoughts? Okay. Which sort?
So I guess my thing is
I mean, you can see the energy that's in my energy. You can see for me, you can see all the things like the
Let's do this. Good discussion is one week. Group them out and see if you can pull one out. So I would, and you can stop me if it's energy or out. Collaboration. These are
We have a couple that say still.
You're going to do
skills, collaboration,
Processes.
skills. What's attribution?
attribution. You mean accountability, open transparency.
Is that a function of the high performance team or is it a function? So now in 23 seconds. Yeah.
Virtual high five. 10 seconds.
So which one do you?
Then we said build tower. All right.
Totally.
Look at expressive.
All right.
You guys are supposed to be done.
Never done, right?
First, I thought it was loud in the beginning. After a minute, it got really quiet and like slow.
Yeah, like a smoothness.
Very quiet and.
So I guess we kept flipping our tower.
You guys kept on like this,
discussing your list.
I went with Mr. Voice, and what I found out was early on when everybody was talking, there was uncertainty in everybody's voice.
Your voice is always very even and louder when you were suggesting something.
How the team is structured, how do we do this, and
I did Decisionmaking. I had a pronoun and there wasn't a
feel that there was a vibration that was
and the only time I heard
sounds tentative. Yes.
or like question, ask a question.
Well, it's more about the hesitation in the voice where you can actually almost feel like there's
And you are most likely to say, I think, or I feel, before stating an idea.
That's what we saw. And then people asking if they could share. Basically, once you all move to the board, the closer the people go to the board, the more certain they sounded. So your positions
You narrow down.
on where you were working, so both of you were close by, and you were sounding like you were like more towards it, and for the, I think it's because the way you were structured, like physically, your voice is almost like reflected that. So I think somebody could be, with my eyes closed, I could tell like, who's where, just based on the way they were speaking. Those were my two major observations.
While you're deciding on the process, there's questions you can suggest discussion for. So ideally, sticky notes and putting together on the wall at the high-speed sorting.
But there's a form of dialogue, even they work. And then the last.
No. Sorting was his idea. I did observe there was disagreement about the top row.
There was more discussion. I don't know if there was disagreement.
I did observe that.
I had body language.
But,
A lot of mine
indicator of a disagreement.
kind of like there was words and stuff.
I did observe a lot of action sort of through the back.
So I kind of grouped those before. So I noticed like a lot of facial expressions while you guys.
I observed that you were standing in the back.
And some of that might have been because there were bags in the way and all that stuff as well, but yeah, it was.
Not words, observations, but supplementing facial questions while you were forward. I noticed like.
Yeah, I chose body language,
initially,
and I almost gave up on it. The first 2 minutes, everybody just sat around writing. I thought everybody sat around writing. But I noticed as soon as the first person who got up and was done, everyone else kind of took that as a cue that, oh, we should move on to the next activity. Which was this over here. Frankly, wasn't quite sure what how you guys were going to proceed based on that, but I did notice everyone kind of just took cues from the first person that decided to sort of move on with the next thing to do. I'll say that was
and lots of animated.
Michael kept his hand in his pocket. I tried. I don't know. I'm meaning to assign it. I'm not going to presume anything. It was just an observation. Your body language was sort of directive, animated, almost charge-ish. I didn't want to assign take charge meaning to it, but you were certainly the most animated, and you were the one who was expressing yourself to the rest of the
Come from an Italian background.
sort of
There's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
Talking with our hands.
Josh was curious about how we were going to fit. It looked like you were like
in the middle, there's actually a point in your toes.
the closer we got to the time limit, the closer we got to that wall. Like you were going to hang back at first, and then once the time drew to the wall, like I can do this myself almost.
I mean, I guess we won't really show how to break that
but body language, you were like wrong, but you know, time kind of drew you in. The team was chaotic as time went on, so we made sure. And one person never touched the sticky notes, I guess this is but offered a lot of advice. So while your hands were in your pockets, quite a bit of let's try to figure kind of right in there silently, like trying to help you out.
What is the observational version of somebody has a pencil? So that's good.
So I had decision making. You guys definitely had a very clear decision making mode that you all seem to fall into. When any of you want to decide something, your manager to call a question. So there was no, let's do it this way. It's like, do you think we should? How about if we? Right? So you were calling a question. Michael was the early decision driver, very, very first, and then it shifted to me. And I could not detect that anybody apparently objected to be left out as a, you know, kind of a decision driver that was called a question. I saw that, you know, when Michael was asking about the sticky, using the sticky notes as the kind of mode, there was a very quick consensus on that. And then Josh questioned the group on idea generation, and you know the suggestion was let's make a decision to do this individually and then combine, put our efforts together. And there was about 30 seconds of discussion, and then we decided yes, consensus. That's how we're going to do it. And then so we all really trusted each other to make progress.
How are you doing on time? One more minute, okay, to wrap up small group discussion. One more minute.
So Michael asked, are we ready then to, and then the decision about how to display these things on the wall is kind of where Pete really kind of stepped up as a person calling the question, how about if we do it this way? Brought up the thing about thought boarding. We started in that direction, and it was almost kind of like an organic shift away from that to more sorting.
information sharing. So you wrote down things on stickies. You put them on the right, and then you put them on the wall and organize them on the wall. And then another form of information sharing is when you interact with the wall, you would point, move, and display. That's I think part of it.
Well, I mean, you iterated on the first idea did not work. I think everybody kind of started seeing that, like, there's a so to me, it was like a bottleneck here, and I could reiterate on that. I mean, a lot of this is just from really I tried to do is actually what I came up with a state so the mass is basically the existing skills. I can tell you that stuff like that. There's like process, you know, go to then state is like where you are. And then all that comes into high performance training. So start out with you have to have somebody still be open to somebody else so there is depends on
How does it bias you?
Because I really bias me. Yeah, but I think one show you how they build.
You guys good? All right, we're gonna regroup as a whole.
Okay.
Am I on? I'm on.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to be wrapping up in about 7-8 minutes or so. But, okay. What was that like the second time around? We'll start with the observers. What, being the fact, the fact that you were observed this first round, how did you approach observing this time? Do you think you did anything maybe a little bit differently? You were observed before. What was that like for you as observers this time? Yeah.
Well, I was very aware of sticking to the facts, presenting the facts, and staying away from making the judgments. But my area didn't have any judgments to be made anyway, so
okay.
it helped. But I was just, especially from the experience.
So it helped. The first round helped you helped inform how you wanted to be an observer even more in the second round.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else? I saw a bunch of great.
So while I was completely aware of the fact that it's like, okay, I needed to keep my judgments out of it, I did notice that in my observations, I had a really hard time doing that. Because some of the things that just kind of like naturally, it's like I came to a conclusion. So even though I was very conscious of that, I still noticed it creeping in.
Yeah. And did you find that when you were writing or when you were debriefing your team, or was it a mixture of both?
It was a mixture of both. I think I was more conscious of it when I was writing because I was like, nope, don't write that. But when I was debriefing, I definitely saw some of that creep in.
Yeah. And Matthias had an interesting point. Like you may feel you want to soften it in
Yes.
some way. Did you feel that might have been part of it? Like, I won't be so cold about it. I'll maybe soften it a little bit. So.
Yeah, we discussed it at the table too, that some of the things she presented that were interpretations would have been really hard to spell out as just observations because there's so many things that go, like the example was pensive. It's like, how do you express that as an observation? There's like 12 things you need to describe and make it, pensive. So that was, that jump was facilitated by the fact that the language goes to these shortcuts.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, it's been interesting hearing a number of you guys that chose tone of voice as your observation area. And Mark, you and I even struggled when we said, well, what kind of examples can we come up with, like the volume and the speed, but like we're not used to giving a lot of adjectives and a lot of words to really describe tone of voice. So that's why I saw lots of things, show as like, focused or harsh, or we just don't have a lot of words. So it's still better to write down what we're observing to just kind of remember what we were thinking in the time, but it kind of gives us that push to say, can we dig a little deeper? Can we find ways to kind of record what got us there? Because we don't have this great vocabulary that we're used to pulling from to kind of give the reason behind some of our interpretations.
That's true. That's true. Yes.
So we definitely, I think, took to heart the fact that we were supposed to keep it factual. However, Ricardo had some great feedback, which was maybe felt a little bit like we were lecturing. So obviously we don't have the benefit of context and existing relationships, but it's still helpful to think that that's something we can keep in mind, which is that balance between just being factual and upfront versus having it come off as instructory, which obviously we want to go for.
Right.
Yeah, and we don't really want, like, again, if we're being factual, it shouldn't be like a list of facts that are necessarily negative, right? It's just what happened. And so I think the delivery of that, as we kind of talked about, is really important, because when you do this, you're not just going to type them up and send them off in Excel. Here are all my observations, right? You're going to have a conversation, and if you ground that conversation in curiosity and understanding and being inquisitive, then it's just an entry into trying to understand that person and what were they thinking and how were they feeling and what dynamics truly were at play with the individual or the group, so that you can support them in a way that actually feels meaningful to them and isn't just my guess at what you, Mark, need, right?
I was wondering, Glenn, do you mind if I pick on you for a moment? Sure. I was observing Glenn as he was debriefing. Would you mind talking a little bit about what you were doing and what kind of came about?
Sure, yeah. So I was basically monitoring this team's physical actions or physical spaces. And one of the things I noticed is when they're trying to bring up their final list, instead of putting it maybe in one place, like one big whiteboard, or maybe having 4 or 5 whiteboards on the walls like that, they're putting it on different cards. So I went and judged and said, you better have used those whiteboards over there than just these things, because these little cards, you can't see what someone else wrote, and maybe you're not able to remember what they wrote. So I use a judgment instead of interpretation.
Sure, and what was interesting about me watching Glenn was that the way you were doing it was you were politely suggesting better ways. It would have been better if you had circled around this way, and it would have been better if maybe you would lean back a little bit so the person could talk. And it was very polite, and it was obviously your intentions were good, and they were helpful intentions. Well, maybe they weren't that good. But that's really tricky because we want to help and we want to be able to provide assistance where we think we can. But again, if we really want to check ourselves at the door, it can be really challenging. And some really good practice for us tonight, and then maybe even starting as early as tomorrow as we begin to observe our teams, maybe our spouse, I don't know. But yeah, so thank you, Glenn. Thanks very much.
I'm guessing that there were some observers in round 1 who wanted to throw in their 2 cents about how to build a better tower.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard when you're just in the observer role.
So, I don't know, I'm kind of pushing back against the not judge thing, because I did decision making. And I have 10 really factual observations on Post-it notes of their decision making, and I still have no idea how they made their decisions. Somebody would say an idea and everybody else would go, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and it would be a good idea, that's a judgment. But they would then do it. I mean, it didn't, like, I couldn't tell another team how to do that.
So it's not,
I mean,
not every observation will require action, right? So this may have been, like you may have observed this and said, oh, it looks like the team is coming to decisions in the time period that they expect. They're achieving their objectives. That may not be something that you necessarily need to follow up and coach them through or provide feedback. We're going to collect a lot of feedback. Not all of it has to warrant a conversation. But if, let's say, you had observed that someone threw out an idea and 3 of the 4 people said yes, and they always moved on, and the 4th person just said nothing, that might be something that you might want to follow up on. So I think it just depends. Hey, you had an awesome, high-functioning team over here.
Hey, thank you.
But it's interesting, right? You look, I think, Kristen, if you don't mind me sharing, you have noticed you started to take down some observations about pronouns, and initially you were like, I'm not exactly sure what this is going to tell me. I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. And then do you want to share kind of what you got to in the end?
Yeah, I just noticed that I had to track the patterns throughout the 5 minutes, because at first I just started by writing down the pronouns that people used, but that didn't tell me anything. So then I started being able to draw patterns between, like, this person was more likely to use I, or this person was more likely to use we, or they used I when they were injecting an idea. And so throughout the 5 minutes, I built, like, throughout to tell me something useful, potentially useful, or something that can be shared. Otherwise, I was going to be like, let's. We. I. I was like, I need something useful.
You know your pronouns.
Helpful or interesting, at least, to share. I felt stressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I noticed was that because of the brevity of the activity, our behavior and our interactions were influenced. Had it been an hour or half an hour, it would have been much different.
Yeah, it would have been different. Why do you think that is, though?
I mean, it was such a short deadline that, we missed some things or we added some things so that we made the deadline.
Okay. As an observer?
Both.
Okay. Okay.
Way to do storming, norming, forming, performing, and like pop.
That's right.
Whole team formation cycle.
A good
Rapid.
taste. So, yes.
What you said really resonated with me, and the idea that just because you're an observer, there's almost a pressure that you have to come up with some kind of revolution or wisdom. And at the end of the day, you're noting pronouns. And maybe something comes of it, and maybe something doesn't, but both are okay. So I like the idea of taking that pressure off of yourself, that it's okay to just observe and see what comes from it without having that expectation that you have to change the world with a statement.
Yeah, and in the real world, we wouldn't obviously, we would want to observe and use these ideas, but we're not necessarily going to have a debrief, like obviously the way we did tonight. Okay, but we did have a question from a gentleman over here. It's like, well, what do you do in the real world if you if you do have feedback that you want to provide. And some ideas that I have, and I'm certainly welcome to anyone else can throw some ideas out, but there are better ways to broach these types of topics, I think, than other ways. Julie provided one of the examples earlier today about me crossing my arms. Stating the fact, impact feedback, some of you may have seen, but stating the fact, Mark, I noticed in the meeting when you were slouching and your arms were crossed, or I noticed that you were in the meeting and your arms were, what was going on with you there? Stating the fact and then leaving an open-ended question or a powerful question so that you invite them to respond to you about what was happening. And you're not obviously passing a judgment onto there, you look really pissed what was going on there. But having an open-ended question and inviting them to answer. And there are a lot of resources out there. Joan was asking, some things just off the top of my head, Coaching Agile Teams by Lisa Adkins, both her book and her class. For those who want to get into the coaching itself, CTI, coactive coaching, right?
Yeah,
Coactive coaching. Even their fundamentals course teaches you a lot about these types of ideas on what to do with this feedback that you're gathering. How you might be able to take it back to the team members and begin a conversation based on very factual observations.
Yeah, and one of the things that we didn't really get to today, because we were mostly hands-on, just kind of practicing some of the observation techniques, is that of course you would want to make sure that you're welcome, that you're invited, that you talk to a team about what your role is going to be, that they know why you're there, that your presence, has an understanding, and that's important because it creates the dynamic that you're going to have. They expect the feedback. You've had some understanding that you're going to share some observations and ask for their input and look for understanding. So. Today we all opted in by showing up to the meetup and being willing to participate in the exercise, but obviously that's not a piece that you would want to skip if you're working with a real team, right? Is making sure that they know what your role as an observer is and that you have an agreement about how you're going to share and discuss feedback.
So yes. I have a question for the entire group, if you don't mind. So we had 5 minutes twice to do a couple of things. And as somebody at that table there pointed out, you think that things would have been different and interactions would have been different if we would have had more time. And I want to posit that this was very true to life because most of us have jobs where you can't get it all done in the amount of time that you're really expected to get it done in. So my question is, how many of you found yourselves behaving or thinking in the same ways and the same patterns that you do during your day job? Because I did. It was really, actually, it was a real eye-opener for me that a couple of the things that I want to improve on as a professional came out as an observer. I felt overworked, oh man, I got to capture all this information about how they're decision making. And to the point where I had all these sticky notes and somebody had to say, hey, that's enough. You got to give somebody else a chance now. And which kind of feeds into the time management thing for me. So I think that this was really instructive because it is very realistic, and I think that all of us could take away something really valuable if we can be, maybe just a little bit introspective about who was I in this exercise? What was I doing? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm doing it again. I'm doing the things that make me stressed at work. I'm stressing myself over being an observer.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Might be a great way to end, actually. I think that was some great words for closing. Any other final, well, having said that. Anything else real quick? Kristen, can you talk?
Observation?
Yes.
No, I can't on that actually, but I had an interesting observation, which was I cared way more about my co-builders and what they thought of me and my interaction than I did of the observers. I don't know if that says anything, but it was interesting. When you were asking us, did you behave any differently because you were being observed? For me, it was I may have behaved differently or just been more thoughtful because I was around people that I didn't know working on something new, and I didn't think about the observers at all.
Okay.
It's interesting. It was an
Very
observation.
interesting. Very good. Yes,
So
you are the last one. Yes.
Thank you. So if we were to take this Gabe with building the blog to our teams. Should we maybe say 3 feet rather than 5? Because I was very disappointed when you said, oh, we knew that you guys would not be able to do it. And I was thinking, what? Seriously? What?
So that's a really interesting question. It kind of doesn't matter. We kind of said, if you're going to use this, you can expand the time, you can shorten the time. But the thing about the 5 feet is that it instigates some pressure. And so what we wanted to give the observers was a good amount to observe, right? So in that short time, you need to make decisions quickly. So how are you going to do that with a bunch of people that you haven't worked with before? When you look up and you say, oh, only a minute and a half left, are you going to pivot? Are you going to change your plan? We wanted to actually create enough scenarios to give ample things for people to observe. So that's why we chose to keep it at 5 feet, even if you don't, accomplish it. But we picked 2 very different challenges, right? So one was a little less realistic, more pressure, more building, kind of moving around. Then we had another challenge that you guys, I think most of you guys did actually come up with 3 characteristics for a high-performing team in the 5 minutes, and it was a different type of interaction. So for us, that's why we picked it, but we definitely would encourage you to try it, tweak it, play with it, and let us know how it goes, because we're always looking for new ways to add on and to make it a better workshop and simulation. So we'd love to hear it.
All right, well, I think that does it for us this evening. And Brian's coming around.
Yep, Brian's going to take it. I think he's going to tell you about collecting the feedback and do the raffle, but thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it.
And now we've got a great segue. I don't know if you guys meant to do that. It was awesome. But hold on before you start moving around real quick. I want to give away the book, but also that feedback, which is very valuable. Michael. We've got note cards out of the front door there with a little basket. And so this is our way of getting some feedback from you guys. Kurt? Jim? Never mind. So, presentation-wise, red, they shouldn't do that ever again. Yellow, not bad. Here's some tweaks we can definitely do. Green, awesome. Still, we want to hear even how you can make it even more awesome. So you can either just leave the green card in a little basket or leave a note. There's pens out there. Same thing from a host and a facilities perspective, the food, the air conditioning. How was it? If it was crappy and you never come back here again, drop us a red note. Also leave us a note so we can tweak and improve that. Yellow again, middle of the road, it was pretty good, but please do this. And then green was like, you guys are great, keep doing it, but leave us a note as well. Any little feedback. So both from the host and space, but also from the presentation what Julie and Mark were able to provide. So great interaction, great RSVPs show up. One of our best so far. Hopefully that's the trend to come for the year. So I will stop talking and let Julie do the honors of drawing the book, the Scrum Field Guide. This is only the second rev of this. It's a really good book.
Loredana?
There you go. Congratulations. There you go. Thanks for coming out.
One last thing, if I may. This Wednesday, I'm also going to be facilitating, this rarely happens twice in 1 week, but I'm also facilitating another meetup for GALE, which is the Games for Agility Learning and whatever it is. Engagement. It is another extremely interactive exercise where we talk about self-organization and workflow, which I love talking about workflow, or the flow of work. So if you can make it Wednesday, it's here. Please do. It's the Gale meetup, and I'll be here as well. So to see you all back here.
And we won't be serving the same pizza. There'll be new.
Yeah, there will be.
Please grab some pizza. There's plenty. Feed your kids, feed your family members, feed yourself, feed your dogs, whatever. All right. Have a good night. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.